Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naradan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on Pathfinder, the role-playing game system. When we last left off, I was talking about the environments that you were going to explore when you went out into your worlds. So let's continue where we left off. We started talking about hills last time. So, from the gradual slopes that I discussed last time, we move into the steep slopes. Now, if I'm moving up a steep slope, it will cost me 2 squares worth of movement for each 5 feet I move up that slope. So it is more difficult. And if I'm running or charging down the hill, I have to make a DC 10 acrobatics check. If I fail it by 5 or less, regardless, I'm going to stop my movement. If I fail it, I'm not going to work very well. If I fail it by 5 or less, I'm going to sort of tumble down a little bit, 1d2 times 5 feet, so 5 to 10 feet, and then stop my movement. I kind of like, whoa! But if I failed by 5 or more, I do the same and I fall prone. I basically tumble down onto my butt because I was not doing it well. Now the acrobatics checks on any kind of hill like this, it's increased by 2 the DC. It's effectively more difficult to acrobatics on a steep slope. Now you can encounter cliffs on a hill. Cliffs will require a DC 15 climb check to get up one of them. And they are traditionally 1d4 times 10 feet, though higher ones can be found out there. There's a traditional size of them. Now the thing about cliffs is, they aren't vertical. They have a width to them. If they're 30 feet or less, they're going to be about 5 feet wide, so that you've moved over 5 feet by the time you get to the top of it. If it's above 30, it's going to be 10 feet wide that you're going to have to worry about. So it's going to be a little more wider. Now, underbrush can show up in hill lands, just like it can in forest. It functions exactly the same way. Another thing is trees. Trees show up in various areas of the hills. Granted, again, it's not going to be as major in the forest, but you can still find stands of trees in various areas. Another important feature is streams. Water flows through there. You can often find it in valleys. Streams are going to be about 5 to 10 feet wide, normally about 5 feet deep, and it's going to be traveling downhill. That's the movement of it. It's always going to be moving downhill. Now you can find stream beds too. It's going to have the same exact dimensions. It's going to be about 5 to 10 feet wide, 5 feet deep, but they're effectively trenches that you're going to find. And they're going to actually have that downhill travel too, because when it's filled with water, the water would be moving downhill. Now, the kind of perception you can get if you're on like gentle sloped hills, you traditionally can get about 2d10 times 10 feet away with how far away you can see. Now, if it's more of like the steep and rugged slopes, it's about 2d6 times 10 feet that you can see away from yourself that you can kind of get good on perception on. Now, hiding in hill lands can be difficult if it doesn't really have a lot of places for it. Though if you are at the top of a ridge or a hilltop, you technically can hide from people below you. That's usually the easiest place you're going to get to hide from something. But it's stuff that's below you because you have ridge or hill blocking the way. Now let's talk about mountains, the sort of natural extension from hills. There are 3 types of mountain areas you can encounter. There's the alpine meadows, the sort of flatter areas of mountains. Then there is rugged mountains and foreboding mountains. Now it's important to note if you get to a sheer stone face that is going to act as a barrier between squares. It's not going to be like taking up squares, a sheer rock wall. It's going to be a barrier in between them, a line in between them. Now, there are also, again, a number of features that can show up in mountains. And they're going to function, again, like any of the other places that have features, that there's a percentage chance you're going to find one in an area. You can find gradual and steep slopes. Just like on a hill, it works exactly the same. You can find them within mountain lands, just the same. You can find cliffs. These function exactly like the cliffs you can find in hills, except they are taller. They're traditionally 2d6 times 10 feet tall. If a cliff is above 80 feet, it will be 20 feet wide, rather than the amount that it was before, the 10 feet. And of course, it's just the same difficulty to climb up it. You can find chasms, which are naturally forming just kind of holes in the ground, almost to say. They function exactly like the pits you'd find in a dungeon, except they're visible. They're traditionally 2d4 times 10 feet deep. They're usually about maybe 20 feet at least long, though they can be longer. That's going to be entirely up to how the chasm works for you. And it's usually between 5 to 20 feet wide. Now, it is important to note in a foreboding mountain, it would be 2d8 times 10 feet deep that a chasm would be. Now, of course, there's light undergrowth. Once again, just like in forest, it can show up in the mountains. And then there is scree. Scree is an area of like gravelly kind of hill lands, of slopes that are kind of difficult to travel on. It's either going to be on gradual or steep slopes, just like it was in the mountains, just like it was in the hills, or what I talked about in the mountains before, but these are covered in gravel. If it is a gradual slope, it increases the acrobatics DCs of anything you're trying to do by 2. Basically makes it more difficult to acrobatics on it. If you're in the steep version, it's 5 that the acrobatics goes up by. Either version, it increases stealth difficulties by 2. It basically makes it a little bit more difficult to stealth. There's areas of dense rubble, of rock and rubble that you have to travel over. This functions as a difficult terrain. Basically, it costs you 2 squares of movement per 5 feet you move through here. And it increases acrobatics DCs by 5 and stealth check DCs by 2. Now there are the sheer rock faces. These require a DC 25 climb check to go up, much more difficult than the last one. Now these are traditionally 2d4 times 10 feet tall in rugged mountains and 2d8 times 10 in foreboding mountains, so it gets very tall. You can find cave entrances. Now, cave entrances are traditionally 5 to 20 feet wide and about 5 feet deep, and they will lead either to a single chamber or they could lead into a dungeon. Traditionally, if it's some kind of creature's lair, it's going to have 1 to 3 chambers, and each one's going to be about 1d4 times 10 feet wide. Now, of course, the alpine meadows can have stands of trees and lots of trees. That's one of those things that could exist here in the mountains, so trees are another feature that can show up. And streams, just like I talked about with hills, they function just the same in mountains, so you can find streams showing up. And, of course, stream beds. Now, at higher altitudes in mountains, it's much colder than down in the lower parts of them, so you can actually find ice sheets in them. Now, I will talk about ice sheets in a later on terrain, but it's something that can show up in mountains, too. Rarely, not as much as in other terrains, but it is an option. Now, perception of the mountains is varies depending on the area you're in. As a guideline, think of it as 4d10 times 10 feet that you can perceive away. But you have to consider, if I'm up the top of a ridge line or the mountain peak, I'm going to have a much better view than if I'm down in a canyon or a valley. So it's going to have massive variables for the perception range, and you'd ask your game master about what kind of perception range you're going to get there. There is an advantage, though, to perceiving in a mountain range. Hearing. You can hear a lot farther within the mountains than you could if you were not. For each 10 feet you travel out for hearing something, traditionally, it increases the DC by 1. For every 20 feet in a mountain, it increases the DC by 1. So it doubles the range in which you can hear something up in the mountains. So that's it for today. I finished talking about hills, introducing you to the rest of the features you can find in these hill lands, and then I moved into talking about mountains, which are an extreme version almost of hills, containing much of the same features, but putting them to much higher and more dangerous, including some other features which are just as dangerous, if not more, up in these mountain terrains that you can move into. Next time I'm going to talk about a major hazard you can find in mountains, avalanches, and the general rules about traveling within them, before moving on to talking about deserts. So any questions, comments, anything you say, anything you think I left out, please just leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.